and healthy sexual practices, and to be free from sexual exploitation and abuse. So I know we do have some disability service providers who have registered for today or who may watch this. And so Illinois is one of the few states that has this law, but now different organizations should be providing some sort of sexuality education. But that does not take the responsibilities off the families, which is what I'm going to be supporting primarily today, because of the research that I've done is all about helping parents be the primary sexuality educators. So the research does show that when adolescents receive sexuality education, the following benefits are reported. They have more responsible sexual behavior. They learn essential skills in social etiquette and self-care. It reduces inappropriate sexual expression. It helps increase pride and confidence and self-acceptance. It aids in the development of a personal sexual identity and helps facilitate a healthy sexual development. And then it helps the individual recognize inappropriate sexual advances and be able to report incidents of suspected sexual abuse. We also know that there are specific benefits of parents as the primary sexuality educators, that it decreases sexual risk behavior and facilitates healthy sexual development. It helps the parent and individual have an open and closer relationship. And parents can individualize what they teach based on their family life or their values or their child's needs at the time, and really modify the content so that their child can understand. And like I said before, my research has been on sexuality education for adolescents and adults with Down syndrome. And that was the title of my dissertation, was Parents as the Primary Sexuality Educators for their adolescents with Down syndrome. So I know this is important. You clearly think it's important because you wouldn't have signed up for this presentation. But I want to emphasize that unfortunately, schools cannot provide all of the information that your loved one needs about sexuality if you have school-age children. And whether it's because they only teach sex ed in an integrated health class and your child is in special ed, or because your child's special ed teacher is not comfortable talking about sexuality topics, or maybe the school board only allows an abstinence-only approach to talking about sexuality because schools have to use approved curriculums when it comes to sexuality education. Or maybe the material is just not taught in the way that your child learns best. And these are all reasons why it is important for parents to be the primary sexuality educators, and why the curriculum that I co-developed is called Home Base. By providing that information by yourself, you can really ensure that your values and beliefs are taught and not just the facts. And you can also gauge your child's learning and modify content so they best understand. And we're going to talk through all of this in the next hour. So one of the activities I like to do when I'm in person is really talk about attitudes, because it's important to think about how our personal values and attitudes may help or hinder our teaching about sexuality. So obviously, we're not going to be able to have some interaction with this, but I'm just going to put some attitudes that exist up on the screen. Some may be true, some may be false. I do not need to know what you think it is, but we're going to talk about how these attitudes can be viewed by others and how they can impact sexuality education. So the first attitude is, it is best to wait for the individual with an intellectual or developmental disability to raise questions about sexuality before discussing the topic with him or her. And some of you may believe this is true, others may think it's false, but what I'm going to tell you is that most individuals with intellectual or developmental disabilities or Down syndrome don't know the questions that they should be asking. And so it's important for us as parents and service providers to start the conversation with them, and then they'll let us know if they have questions. But again, they might not even know what they need to be asking. Sex education for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities has a valuable role on safeguarding them from sexual exploitation. And this is very much true. We know that individuals, unfortunately, with intellectual and developmental disabilities do face sexual exploitation at 7 to 10 times greater chance than individuals without a developmental disability. But we know that by teaching them about consent and appropriate touch and who's allowed to touch us, and what to do if someone touches us and we didn't like it or give permission. That helps them to be able to report incidences of sexual abuse. So it's very important to talk about a variety of topics so they know what is good or bad touch and things like that. Individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities can have safe, healthy relationships with individuals without a disability. And I'm sure for some of you, with just me reading that and you seeing it on the screen, are thinking, oh, absolutely not. However, we like to consider a relationship not just romantically. So it's not just with a romantic partner, it's our family relationships, it's our friendships, it's the relationships we have with coworkers or classmates. So absolutely, individuals with Down syndrome can have safe and healthy relationships with individuals without a disability, and oftentimes it's encouraged. Here's another attitude. Parents of adults with Down syndrome should be informed of all medical issues, including reproductive and sexual ones. I'm sure 100% of the parents on this call are thinking, absolutely. But what if your loved one is their own guardian? They're their own guardian. You don't necessarily have the right to know this information if they don't want you to. I'm not saying that you shouldn't let them be their own guardian, but you can have an understanding about what information does need to be shared with you from that, from your loved one. Sterilization should be used as a means of inhibiting sexual desire in individuals with Down syndrome. Now, I'm going to tell you that sterilization is not going to inhibit sexual desire. It's also not going to prevent sexually transmitted infections or even sexual exploitation. The other interesting fact, which is very disturbing, is that with forced sterilization, there are 31 states in the United States currently that have laws in place that allow forced sterilization of disabled people. So that means judges and family members and guardians are making the decision about sterilization for people with disabilities without their consent. Ironically, I used to think it was just illegal and that it couldn't happen at all, but it can happen, but I do not encourage that because sterilization only is going to prevent unwanted pregnancy, but there's so many other ways through education that we can prevent pregnancy. In general, sexual behavior represents a major problem area in management and caring for adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And I'm sure some of the disability service providers that are listening today might say, absolutely, like these are some of the number one issues that they see, in workshops or day programs. But ultimately, I don't think it's a major problem area. And again, with education, these are things that we can prevent. And then the last one, people with intellectual and developmental disabilities are less likely to identify as non-heterosexual or part of the LGBTQ plus population than the general population. And I don't have any percentages, but I can tell you even here at the Adult Down Syndrome Center, we do have individuals who have identified being in same-sex relationships, who have, preferred to wear women's clothing, even though they were born a male. And that's all okay. But it's still an attitude because some families might not think it's okay based on, their values and beliefs. And so again, with all of these attitudes, we don't want it to hinder our teaching about sexuality. We want it to help our teaching. And so we just need to consider these attitudes before we start teaching about sexuality education. There are also some myths about sexuality in people with intellectual and developmental disabilities that can impact our ability to teach. And one is that some people think that individuals, are asexual, right? That they don't have sexual desires or needs, but that's not the case. That especially if they have a physical disability, in addition, that they're unable to have sex. That they have decreased needs for touch and affection. And I'm sure many of you are laughing because we know that individuals with Down syndrome, not all of them, they love to touch and hug and things like that. So we know that that's definitely not always the case in someone with Down syndrome. That they do not recognize pleasure or the expression of love. And obviously we can see that that is a myth with our loved ones with Down syndrome. or that they lack self-confidence. Now, everyone might lack self-confidence at any given time, but overall, individuals with, with Down syndrome or an intellectual and developmental disability don't lack self-confidence any more than anyone else. We already talked about this. We do know that unfortunately they do get sexually assaulted at a greater rate. Many people do believe that individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities do not need sexuality education, but we're going to talk about all the reasons why they do need it and benefit from it today. That they should only marry and have sexual relationships with other people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And while many people might believe that this is true, I'm sure there are other situations where this has been safe and healthy and consensual, as long as we provide sexuality education and make sure and we support the individuals. That they should not have children. I actually know a couple with Down syndrome who are married who have chosen not to have children because they know how hard it is just to take care of themselves, that they couldn't even imagine what it'd be like to add a child to the mix. So it's not that they should not have children. Many choose not to, but that's what we're going to talk about. They need to understand what the responsibilities of parenting are in order to make that good decision for themselves. We want to help with supported decision making. And then they do not identify as anything other than heterosexual. And we talked about that in the previous slide. So the research has also talked to us about some parent-reported as well as staff-reported barriers. So why these individuals are not talking about sexuality education. And so for parents, many just feel inadequate or lack proper information. Sometimes they feel embarrassed or unsure of what their child needs to know at different ages. So they're just unsure about how to approach the topic. Maybe they're uncomfortable with their own sexuality or the idea of their loved one being a sexual being. They're scared of that sexual abuse for very good reason, right? But then that's impacting their ability to provide effective sexuality education. They fear of arrest or legal problems. And we see this often that, an individual might get touched inappropriately by someone else with a disability in the classroom or at work. And families don't know what to do. And so someone might want to pursue legal options. But again, with appropriate sexuality education, we're going to limit these issues. And that kind of goes along with socially appropriate behaviors. And parents are unsure about what the future holds. But guess what? I'm sure you're unsure of the future for all of your children, not just your child with Down syndrome. So that shouldn't be something that holds you back from providing sexuality education. And then as far as staff-reported barriers, negative attitudes about sexuality in people with disabilities. So we already went through some attitudes that people have, and staff have reported that they don't necessarily believe that the individuals that they're working with are sexual beings. We also know that staff have a lack of training. They are not being given the support or resources by their employers in order to provide effective sexuality education. Now, we do know that obviously in the state of Illinois, because of that law, some of this is changing. Staff also report that they have lack of consent to teach from the parents or guardians of the individuals that they work with. And so that's something we also have to keep in mind, because these organizations who are providing sexuality education do still have to get consent from parents or guardians in order to provide it. And many parents are still saying, no, they don't need it. But that's a barrier. And again, hopefully after today, you realize how important sexuality education is. And then organizations often lack policies about sexuality and sexuality education. And I know they're working towards that as well, especially now that they're to be providing some sexuality education. So we've talked about why it's important. But what topics or what kinds of things should be talked about? And again, I'm not going to ask you to enter it in the chat, but take a second to, when I say the word sexuality, what do you think of? And this is another activity that we do during the home-based training. And we do it, the training was 3 different sessions. And at each session, we had them think about the word, because at first people are like scary or masturbation or penis or exploitation, right? But Sexuality is so much more. There's so much that encompasses sexuality, and it has to do with self-esteem, and it has to do with self-advocacy. And, there's so many positive words when it comes to sexuality and not just negative. And, I believe that sexuality is an integral part of who we are, what we believe, what we feel, and how we respond to others. And so there's 3 areas that I look at when I think about sexuality. And the first is physical, right? So our body parts, having sex, or our sex, when our gender, intimacy, sexual experiences. So what we look at or what we feel. And then identity is like who we are, right? Our gender and gender roles, our sexual orientation. And then there's a whole emotional piece to sexuality. So body image and self-esteem, our sexual thoughts and fantasies, our attitudes and beliefs, and then just all our relationships. So really, we're going to talk a lot about why talking about sexuality really supports our healthy relationships. And like I said before, these are not just romantic or intimate relationships. They can also impact our relationships with our family and our friends and our coworkers. So here are some overarching headings of some sexuality topics to consider. So you can think about it as human development, dating and relationships, sexual activity, sexual health, pregnancy, and rights and responsibilities. And again, this is another activity we do during the training. We have these papers put up on the wall, and we have a whole list of things that could fall under each of these subheadings. And it's not to overwhelm the parents about, oh my gosh, look at all these things we're supposed to talk about. At the end, they find out oh, when we talk about body parts, it really can be under human development, but it also sort of is part of sexual activity, and it might even be part of pregnancy. So you realize that talking about one little thing can really cover so many other areas. So let's look at each of these areas specifically. So under human development, what kind of topics might fall under human development? Things like identification of sexual body parts, puberty and all the things that occur during puberty for both males and females, and just the physical differences between males and females. Talking about privacy of the body, and I'll give you some examples of public and private and ways to teach that a little bit later. Feelings of arousal, right? So, having erections and what to do with erections in a classroom. All the things about grooming and hygiene that we need to consider in order to keep our body safe and healthy, as well as self-esteem. And then when it comes to dating and relationships, what kinds of things fall under here? The types of relationships. So we might have a boyfriend or girlfriend, but we might have a crush on someone, or we might just be a family member, and talking about who we can even be in a romantic relationship with. Alternate sexual identities. So talking about, it may not be in your family, but maybe someone they go to school with or they work with identifies as something other than, heterosexual, or identifies as transgender. And it's important that if they have questions about it, you're able to answer those questions. Boundaries play a huge part when it comes to healthy relationships, especially personal or social boundaries, making sure that, our personal space, appropriate touch for different people, and then even how much we can talk on the phone or text someone, and making sure we're not crossing any boundaries. Who is appropriate to date? Maybe planning a date. They don't know, oftentimes families help so much with getting a couple together that they don't even realize all the steps it takes to, all the planning it takes in order to just plan a simple date. Handling rejection. So this isn't even just with dating and relationships. When we talk about this in our social skills groups, I ask, how many of you have had your parents tell you no before? And they're like, nope, not me, right? So they don't even think about it, but it can be like, I want a pop today. Nope, you can't have it, right? And they don't even realize, but sometimes they think that they're doing something wrong if we tell them no. So talking about handling rejection, what it means, what we can do. Things that make relationships healthy versus unhealthy. Breaking up. It's not fun to do. No one wants to do it, but talking about how to do it safely and effectively. And it's not just with romantic partners. Sometimes we have to break up with friends. Consent. You'll see this a few times. It's very important to talk about consent, and I'll talk a little bit later about how we can teach about consent. Marriage, what's it mean? Oftentimes, if you ask someone with Down syndrome why they want to get married, they want the party or they want to wear the gown, right? They don't understand what it means to be married. They just see it as the wedding and not the relationship. And then socially appropriate behavior. And there's so many things, and we'll talk about some of them in a few slides, that we need to consider when it comes to socially appropriate behavior. So another topic is sexual activity. So these are going to be things, all the intimacy, the kissing, the touching, the foreplay, intercourse, safety, again, consent, right? We need permission for all of this. And it is interesting. I have not found too many couples with Down syndrome who really care about intercourse. Doesn't mean it's not happening, but they want more of that physical intimacy with the touching, the holding hands, the cuddling, the kissing. But it's important for them to understand what intercourse entails so that they can make the decisions about whether or not they choose to engage in that. But like I said, for the most part, in the couples that I've spoken with, it's much more with just the holding hands, hugging, kissing. And then when it comes to sexual health, it's important that they know about the use of contraception if they're going to be sexually active, and knowing what sexually transmitted infections are and how to prevent them. For girls, it's important to understand menstruation and how to manage their period. And for both boys and girls, about masturbation, where it's appropriate to do it, right? So masturbation is not a bad thing. It's just something that should be done in private. Wet dreams, telling them that's okay, it's normal, it happens, and what to do if that happens. All right, well, if you wake up in the morning and your sheets are wet, I just want you to take your sheets off and put them in the laundry. We'll put clean sheets on your bed, whatever it is. Don't make a big deal out of it. Same with erections. So erections happen. It happens to everyone. Let's try not to touch it. If we're at school, maybe we go to the bathroom. We should watch the type of clothes we're wearing. Don't wear like those athletic shorts or pants, because obviously we can see erections more easily with those type of pants. And then sexual health exams. So this is important to talk about with your physician. I know here at the Adult Down Syndrome Center, if women are not sexually active, it's not recommended necessarily that they have pap smears because they have such a low risk of cancer. But perhaps males will still need a prostate exam. And I believe that we are going to do future webinars on sexual health specifically, but probably sometime next year. And then pregnancy. Even if someone's not interested in having a child, it's important to know how it happens or what happens to the body, and giving birth and raising a child. And we can do this all with using the teachable moment. Perhaps a sibling becomes pregnant, so then you can just talk to them about it. Just more natural. It doesn't seem scary. I know a lot of people think about having the sex talk. It's just this one-time talk and you get everything out on the table and then you're done. You're like, whew, I did it, right? But that's not what it is. We can incorporate these conversations anytime, really, and it's not just a one-time talk. I like to joke, I'm in my mid-40s. I'm still waiting for my parents to have the talk with me, right? So it's not supposed to be scary. And we're going to talk about more about how we can address it after we get through these topics. The final heading really is rights and responsibilities. We want to talk about the laws and consequences, right? We don't want to scare them about touching someone inappropriately, but we want them to know about consent and that we have to have consent. And this comes with any touch. So I even talking about hugs, right? Because we know individuals with Down syndrome love to be hugged, or people in the community are coming up to our loved ones with Down syndrome and just hugging them, right? And that's not okay. So I like to teach, we just have to ask before we touch. And this goes with everyone, right? Can I hug you? Can I high five? And then we can talk, and we talk about this in our social skills groups, about how to respond if you don't want to do it. You know what? I'm not comfortable hugging, but I can fist bump today. And we talk about how consent can change. We can give permission one day and we can take it away the next. Other topics would be exploitation and abuse, what to do if someone touches us without our permission. And then again, these responsibilities of marriage and parenting. They think it's this party. They don't understand all the responsibility of actually raising a child. It's important to talk about that. And then I mentioned socially appropriate behavior and social skills and all these things for healthy relationships. And this is for anyone. So with social skills, it's things like appropriate greetings and introductions and manners and asking and answering questions. If you've ever, watched two people with Down syndrome having a conversation, oftentimes one person's always asking the questions and one person's always answering, but it's not like a reciprocal conversation. Individuals with Down syndrome don't really stay on topic very well, but sometimes it's just because the flow of the conversation is going too fast for them. And so by the time they chime in with what's been on their mind, the conversation has already moved on. But it's important to encourage staying on topic and taking turns and compromise and apologizing and really applying these social skills across different settings. It really can help develop strong, positive peer and family relationships. When it comes to social boundaries, it can also be personal boundaries. So personal space, appropriate touch, public versus private. And then I mentioned things about calling or texting and how often we can do it or what time of the days we can do it. Conflict resolution. So teaching flexibility, which is also very challenging for individuals with Down syndrome, and generalizing skills. So they might know how to do something in one environment, but have a hard time doing it in a different environment. Ability to manage conflict and work as a team and problem solve and compromise. Right? We talked about handling rejection and how to respond when someone says no and what that means. With understanding emotions, how to communicate how we feel effectively, right? So we have to understand how we feel and then we have to share that. So instead, it's not okay to act out. All of our feelings are okay. It's allowed to be mad, sad, angry, but we can't, hurt ourselves or someone else or destroy property or say harmful things. When we feel that way. What else can we do? We can use an I statement. Dating skills. We talked about this. Who's appropriate to date? How do you find someone to date? Where can you go on a date? All the things to plan a date. Well, like I said, consent's going to be on here many, many times because it's so, so important, but also knowing that it's not just you giving consent, the other person has to give consent. And it's not just about touch. It could also be to be in a relationship. How many times do we hear someone with Down syndrome say that they have a boyfriend, but that boyfriend has no idea that they're in a relationship, right? Both people have to consent to be in a relationship. With abuse, again, no one should touch you without your permission. And then intimacy, what are you comfortable with? It's okay if you're not ready to kiss or you never want to kiss, but you're okay with holding hands, right? That's okay. And then working on how to communicate what your boundaries are. Where is it okay to be intimate? And then, working on those concepts of public and private. So that's a lot of things to think about what we need to talk about. But I think what families and disability service providers really want to know is how do I talk about it? Because like I said, it's not a one-time talk. It's something that can come up on a regular basis. So how do we do this? And so the first thing I want you to understand is that I see kind of like, 4 steps for parents, 3 for staff. And the first thing goes back to even the earlier slides, to acknowledge your attitudes about sexuality and disability. And it's because the topic of sexuality and disability really is a complicated one. And it's laden with our own values and beliefs about ourselves and our bodies and our interactions with others. And so those beliefs, impact our interactions with that person with Down syndrome. And then for parents, communicate your values, but don't allow them to hinder your teaching. And it's really not staff's role to communicate their values, right? That's why it's important for the sexuality education to really happen at home, but for staff to make sure that your values are not impacting your ability to teach. And then give permission, and this is for everyone. This does not mean you're giving approval for any and all sexual attitudes and behavior, but it means that you're giving permission for the individual to approach you with any questions. And it means that you accept them and recognize them as a sexual being. and that you can find resources that are going to be useful, even if it's for future conversations, and that you're going to be prepared to have very specific discussions about aspects of sexuality and set boundaries and social expectations. And then you're going to share that information. And you're going to make sure that information is accurate and understandable, timely, and relevant. And I want you to consider the individual's learning style, which we're going to talk about, and use simple language. You also want to use the teachable moment, which I talked about, whether or not someone's pregnant, and you can talk about having a baby, or you're watching a TV show and you see a couple in a relationship, and then you ask them like, oh, do you know what it means to be in a relationship? Oh yeah, they're boyfriend and girlfriend. What does that mean? Is there someone you're interested in? Things like that. And then modeling healthy attitudes and respectful boundaries. And one thing you can do is you can ask for consent before you do things, especially because some individuals with Down syndrome may still need help with some self-care skills. Ask permission before just touching them or walking in on them in the bathroom. Knock on their door if their door is closed before entering. And so you're modeling that behavior that you want them to do as well. There's also 3 core concepts that can serve as building blocks to support you when you're discussing sexuality topics. And the first one is communication. And knowing that communication is a two-way street. And there should be opportunities for all participants, whether it's family or staff and the individuals with Down syndrome, to ask questions and provide feedback and express their values. Now, you may not have all the answers when someone comes up and asks you a question, or even if you try to initiate a conversation, and that's okay. You're not expected to. And all you have to say is, that's a great question. Let me think about it, and I'll come back and we can talk about it another time. And there's nothing wrong with saying that. You also want to have an attitude of respect that shows respect for both you, and that person with Down syndrome. And, respect for the sexual rights, knowing that they're a sexual being and that they should, they have the right to this sexuality education and to live a healthy sexual life. And then safety, really creating this safe space that allows for questions and recognizes that there's no wrong or bad questions. And it's going to avoid shaming or blaming. And this is where you really want to remember your nonverbal cues, right? You want to be more open and relaxed, which again can be really hard if we're not super comfortable talking about sexuality. So this is something to work on. And so in remembering the concepts of communication and respect and safety, you're really creating a healthy environment, and you're going to enrich that parent-child relationship by providing this. So there's 2 ways to approach sexuality education. There's a planful approach and a reactive approach. And this planful approach does not mean you have to have your plan set in stone for, if this happens, this is how I'm going to act, right? A planful approach is still when a situation involving sexuality or sexual behavior arises, the parent or disability service provider takes the initiative and uses this as an opportunity to teach instead of punish or scold. So by being planful, you're creating a learning experience for everyone, and it leads to improved communication and knowledge. So something might happen, and we'll give an example next, but you don't punish. You look at it like, oh, this is a great learning opportunity. How can we teach about this so it doesn't happen again? Whereas the reactive approach is that when a situation involving sexuality or sexual behavior arises, the parent or disability service provider responds to the situation by restricting or punishing or limiting the behavior or communication. And then this response contributes to a negative message about sexuality and sexuality education. And so that's what we want to avoid. So here's the example. A parent of an adolescent boy with Down syndrome is called by the principal because her son was found playing with his penis in the classroom. And mom tells the principal she will take care of it when he comes home. So the planful approach would be that you can, talk to Mike about the concepts of public and private, and mention that touching your penis is something that should be done in private. And say that everything at school is considered a public space, even in the bathrooms. And tell him that he can talk with you about masturbating or touching his penis at home, in his bedroom or bathroom, because those are private areas, right? So it happened, but you're not punishing him. You're using this as an opportunity to teach and tell him what could be done in the future if he feels this need. Whereas with the reactive approach, the same thing happens, and at school, the teacher yells at him to stop touching his penis, and then everyone else in the classroom stops and stares and laughs at him. And the teacher tells him his parents are going to be so mad and disappointed in him when they find out, and you shame him and send him to the principal's office. And then at home, you ground him when he comes home. He feels shamed for doing something that is natural, and he doesn't understand what he did was wrong, right? So in this example, this reactive approach, there was no teaching. He was just being punished. So he didn't know, again, that something was so natural about him touching his penis was wrong. But in that planful approach, we're talking about, hey, this is normal and natural and okay, but it has to be done in private. And these are the places that are private. And I mentioned that it's important to consider how the individual learns best. And so we know that many individuals with Down syndrome are visual learners, but they may also benefit from incorporating some auditory or motor strategies as well. So those visual learners are the ones that really need to see the information or material in one form or another. Whereas auditory learners really like to learn best when hearing the information. And the motor learners need to do the activity or practice the skill or touch something in order to learn most effectively. So what does that look like? Some ways to teach with visual, for a visual learner is to use visual supports like pictures or schedules. And if you've heard me talk before, you know that I am a huge fan of visual supports. Using social stories, just demonstrating, right? That's why role modeling is so important. They learn by what they see. So whether it's what they see at home or what they see in movies or videos, but because they are such strong visual learners, this can also impact their ability to learn what real life is like, right? So they watch a Disney movie and they see two characters meet and fall in love and get married in the course of 2 hours. And so they think that they meet and fall in love and get married, that's what romantic relationships are about, right? Or I have a sexual rape video that I didn't show today, but it talks about how this individual with Down syndrome, he learned about sex and love and marriage through SVU and Mamma Mia. So SVU is Special Victims Unit. So he's very scared of sex because he always sees people getting in trouble if they've had it. But he knows about love because of Mamma Mia. So people, again, meet and fall in love and get married. So we do have to be careful with some of the movies and videos that we show them. And that's where the teachable moment then would also help so that you can talk through what they're seeing. And then just having written materials with lots of graphics. And then for the auditory learner, just giving them verbal praise or verbal prompts. Perhaps you have a social story, but they listen to it while they're looking at the story as well, so that they can hear what is written. Maybe they like to read, so they read it out loud. Or just having some kind of group discussion about it. So like in different social skills groups, that's why those can be effective. And then for the motor learners, you're going to practice and experiment and role play. Our individuals with Down syndrome, many of them love to act. So sometimes that role play is a really great way to teach some skills. They're going to model behavior that they see. So again, it's important that we're making sure that we're acting in the way we want them to act. Perhaps they write down, what they're learning, and that helps them process it better. Or we can play a game with it, and so then it helps them learn it in a fun way. So here is another case study. At work, the boss is concerned that your young adult with Down syndrome is having trouble with personal boundaries and has been touching peers inappropriately, basically hugging coworkers and customers. The boss does not want your child to be fired for this behavior. And you've also recently noticed some similar behaviors when you're out in public with your child, that they've been just hugging people without permission. So what can we do? When we think about the learning strategies, we're going to go through and think about some visual ways, some auditory ways, and some motor ways that we can work on teaching about appropriate touch. So for those visual learners, we might do a social story on hugging or appropriate touch. We may demonstrate appropriate touch, both the type of touch and where is okay to touch for different people. We might have a picture of people they can hug and are pictures of strangers through an X with an X through them. I don't teach that strangers are bad people. I don't teach stranger danger. I teach that strangers are people we don't know. Because we don't know that all strangers are bad. I may have never met your loved one, and so I'm a stranger, but I'm not going to, I'm not dangerous, right? And so we also have many doctors, nurses, firemen, policemen are also strangers to them, but they're healthcare workers and they're there to help us. So they have to know that those strangers, it would be okay for them to touch us or talk to us if it impacted our health. But again, that's a slippery slope also. But that's where the circles curriculum comes in. And I'll show you a slide on it because you'll see that the circles curriculum ends up in all three of these boxes. So that will be, I'll talk more about that in a minute. When it comes to auditory learners, we're going to verbal praise when they touch appropriately. Hey, good job, or even like thumbs up with that good job, right? Because individuals with Down syndrome, many of them love that positive reinforcement. We might give verbal prompts when they touch inappropriately, but we don't say no or stop. We remind them what they need to do. So maybe it's quiet hands or some other word that you guys have decided upon. It might be something totally off topic like banana, because they don't want someone to know that you're trying to correct them. And so, but if they hear banana, they know that means quiet hands and that they're not supposed to touch. Perhaps listening to or reading a social story about hugging. And again, the circles curriculum. And then when it comes to motor, you might practice appropriate touch with different types of touch and the different relationships from people in our lives. Again, we're going to model appropriate touch. You can role play different scenarios. So you're at work, a customer comes up to you, what do you do, right? And have them practice that. It can be hard sometimes to role play though, because they're like, but that isn't the customer at work. Or if you give a scenario and they're like, but I don't have a brother, right? So it can be really tricky. So it's not great for everyone, but it is an effective tool for some. They can write a list of people they can hug. So instead of saying, don't have them create a list of all the people they cannot hug, but just write a list of the people they can, because it's really important for us to teach them what to do and not keep telling them what not to do. And again, I said the circles curriculum. So the circles curriculum is published by Stanfield Publishing and was created by Leslie Walker Hirsch. And it's a really nice way to talk about how to touch, talk, and trust different people in our lives. So it has these series of concentric circles with the person being in the center. And then the further out you get, the less you can talk, trust, and touch those people. And so when you're running the circles curriculum, everyone gets their own version. And each week you talk about a different topic, and then you watch videos on it. And then you get to color in your circle and then write in people that fall in that circle in your lives. And then there's also this big mat that then you can do it you can stand on it on the floor or hang it on the wall, and they can point, and then they can put pictures of their different relationships on this. So again, it's incorporating both visual, motor, and auditory. And again, it tries to make touch or these relationships as black and white as possible, which is really tricky because so many social skills have all this gray area. And so we try to make things as black and white as possible. And so you can also individualize it for your family. So it says in the blue circle, that family circle, that you can hug and kiss your family, right? But some families don't kiss even on the cheek, right? Whereas other families probably always kiss on the cheek or the lips. And so it's okay to say, you can do this, but that's not what our family does. Our family just hugs, right? And then what's not shown on this is the sweetheart. So the person you're in a romantic relationship with is like a heart shape typically on the blue circle, because you can do the same kind of touch with someone who's your sweetheart as your family, except that it's romantic, and then you talk about what romantic is. We have a very modified version of just touch. I believe this is still in our resource library, and we'll have a link to all of our resources at the end, and you'll have access to those when you get the PowerPoint. But it just talks about who can touch what body parts, or how we can touch in the different, areas of our life. So whether it's you or your family or your friends. We also have a whole video on appropriate touch that, stars Christina and her family and friends, and she demonstrates how she can touch people in her life, and why it's important to know. And what's great is that there's research that shows that if individuals with Down syndrome see people that look like themselves doing something, that's an even better way for them to learn, right? So like, oh, they look like me and they're doing it, I can do it too. And so I talked about consent a bunch. And so these are just some words you can think about when you're trying to teach about consent. And one is to give permission, right? That's what consent means. Give permission. And I mentioned this before. It is okay to change our mind, and we can give permission and we can take it away. It's important to know that in a relationship, both people must give permission. So if this is about being in a romantic relationship, it should be important that both people consent to be boyfriend or girlfriend. They should both consent to how the body is touched and who sees our body. Right? It's important with consent to teach if someone touches you without your permission to talk to a trusted adult. When they're at a doctor's office, it's important that the doctor asks consent before touching them, right? Or if they have to put a stethoscope under their gown or shirt, that they ask permission first and then they wait for an answer, right? It's not just about asking, we have to wait for that confirmed yes. So here's a story we have in our resource library about consent for someone that, wants to look at that story, or if you want to use this as a resource to read to your individual, or they can read it themselves. It's also important to know about public and private. So we have some resources for both females and males about things that can happen in public and private. And it's because I really look at 4 things when it comes to privacy. We have private body parts, there are private places, there are private behaviors, and there's private talk. And so then these are more stories about privacy. We have one for boys, we have one for girls. We also have a general one story about public. And again, it talks about what we can do in public versus what we can do in private. And then body changes. So this is one of the things that comes under puberty, right? So for these adolescents, all these things are starting to happen to their bodies and they don't know what to do about it. So there's a story about it. Talks about the things that can happen, for both girls and for boys. And if there's questions, to ask your parents, right? Or, we can modify this if there's someone else that they're supposed to ask instead of a parent. Menstruation. So many families come in and they don't know if their daughter is going to be able to tolerate menstruation. And many of the females that come to this clinic tolerate it quite well and can manage their menstrual hygiene all by themselves. So there's a story about what menstruation is. And then there's one about when I should change my pad. We find that most women that come here use pads and not tampons. There's advantages and disadvantages to both. Obviously, if someone wants to swim, they're not going to be able to swim on their period if they only use pads. But sometimes with tampons, even though we do know individuals who use them, it can be harder to remember to change them because they don't have that visual prompt, right? When we see a pad that needs to be changed, we can tell. But if we don't remember that we have a tampon in, if we don't have a regular time to remove it, tampons require, different fine motor skills than the pads, but the pads still require some fine motor skills, so there's period panties. There's a whole number of things that, again, we hope to cover in a sexual health webinar in the future. But so there's stories here on maybe you just change it at meal times, right? You wake up, you change it lunch, you change it dinner, and you change it again when you go to bed, or actually the steps of changing a pad. And again, this could be different for every individual. Masturbation happens. We know it happens. So here's some stories about it. We have one on male masturbation, just in general that it happens. We have one about how to masturbate. We also have a female one. I'm not certain that it has been uploaded to the resource library yet, but we will get that because, females do masturbate as well. Another topic that should be discussed because they see it in the community, right? Could be the difference between sexual orientation versus your sexual or gender identity. Right. So sexual orientation is your attraction to other people. This is how, you identify as far as your orientation, whereas your identity is really how that person perceives themselves and what they might call themselves. And it might be same or different from the sex assigned at birth. right? And so a lot of people are starting to use pronouns to help with their identity. And so that might be something you need to talk about with your loved one. And so this is a website, thegenderbread.org, that really does a nice job, I think, helping explain some of this, at least for us to understand in order for us to be better teachers. So it kind of talks about the genderbread person and talking about like the spectrum, right, for each about identity and expression and sex and attraction, things like that. And I talked about social skills, right? So we know social skills are so abstract. We really want to try to make them as black and white as possible. So all of these are resources we have in our resource library. We like to create rules because sometimes that's easier. And then also we really want to try to tell someone what to do and not what not to do, right? We shouldn't be saying no or stop. That's not teaching them anything. The way to change behavior is to teach them what to do. So telling them, let's try it this way. So whether it's, having rules for conversation, so they remember about that reciprocity and that they should look people at their face when they talk and they should listen to what's being said, speak in a, clear and loud voice, or compromise, right? And so we like to talk about how there's 3 different ways you can compromise. And that's something that is really hard for a lot of us, right? So many of the things the resources we have, we create for people with Down syndrome, but it's not just for people with Down syndrome. Many of us need to know some of these skills as well. Whether there's different rules for sharing touch and affection, or a whole resource on handling rejection. Like I said, that's a hard one. And oftentimes if we tell someone no, a person with Down syndrome, no, they think that we are, they're in trouble, right? And so we talk about that. We have a whole resource on planning a date. So our friends, Christina and Jacob, it goes through all of the things they have to think about in order to plan that date. We like to talk about these ingredients for a successful relationship, that good communication and positive interactions can lead to a successful relationship. And what's that look like? Sometimes we have to break up. Here is a resource all about what it is and how to manage it. There's a whole variety of other resources. Those were just a little snippet, but I want to allow time for questions. And so it's just important to know that sexuality is a right, but that sexuality is a very broad topic. And many of you have already started talking about sexuality. When you started talking about body parts when they were little, you talked about public and private, right? You've talked with them probably about some of the puberty things, depending on their age, right? You've talked about it. Some of those were not hard conversations. The rest of them do not need to be hard either, right? It's just about feeling comfortable and confident and having access to resources that are going to be helpful for you to get the answers so that you can talk about it. And it's important to know that parents really do play an important role in the sexuality education of their children. And try to be planful. Don't be so reactive, but remember you can still be planful as a reaction. So use them as teaching moments. Try not to scold or punish. When you use the concepts of communication, respect, and safety, it's just going to make for a much healthier sexual environment to teach sexuality, to teach the way the person learns best, whether it's through visual cues, auditory cues, or practicing with, actions. And it's okay to ask for help, right? None of us have all of the answers. It's important that you know that you can come to me, you can go to other parents, right? Hey, did you talk about this? How did it go? Did you find, what was effective? What didn't work? That's okay to ask. You are not on an island by yourself about when it comes to sexuality education. So the next 2 slides are all free resources, different links to different ways that you can find information in order to support yourselves in teaching about sexuality education. So this healthy relationship workbook is really great because it's a workbook that an individual with Down syndrome could complete. You could sit down with them and work on it together. It talks about a variety of things when it comes to relationships. The Florida Developmental Disability Councils has this sexuality across the lifespan. It's really more of a curriculum, but there could be information in there that would be helpful for you as parents to share. It could be helpful for disability service providers if they wanted to kind of have some kind of curriculum to teach in their places of work. The Healthy Relationships Toolkit by Vanderbilt is really great. It has a bunch of different visuals that you can use, or you can kind of create your own resources with their visuals. The Family Life and Sexual Health is also a curriculum that is free through the King County Department of Public Health that can be used. The Sexuality and Disability is a guide for parents. Again, all of this is free. And then Planet Puberty is a website that has wonderful resources. It's out of Australia, so there could be a little bit of different English than for those of us in the United States. But overall, the content is really great and should be really helpful. Terry Cowenhoven is amazing when it comes to this. She has 2 books. Unfortunately, Woodbine House Publishers has closed, and so the books may not be available. You might be able to find them on Amazon right now, but I do know that she is working on updating the editions and self-publishing, so they should be available soon as new versions. But if you can find either Boyfriends and Girlfriends or the Teaching Children with Down Syndrome About Their Bodies, Boundaries, and Sexuality, Terry has done a phenomenal job. The Boyfriends and Girlfriends book is really meant for the individual with Down syndrome to read, or for you to read with them and go through, whereas the Teaching Children with Down syndrome About Their Bodies, Boundaries, and Sexuality is more for the parent or disability service provider. It's not a book you have to read from cover to cover. She breaks it up into different topics, and you can just look at that chapter, and she gives ideas about how to teach certain topics. If you're looking for videos, amaze.org has some videos about different sexuality education topics, as well as the National Council on Independent Living. So again, when you have get these PowerPoints, you'll just be able to click on those links for videos to see if any of those would be helpful in your teaching. Obviously, our resource library contains videos, articles, and booklets on a variety of topics. And so here again is the link for, all of our social skills resources, and then the specific links if you're looking for the person with Down syndrome, or for the family and caregiver. And then same with all of the puberty, sexual health, and relationships resources. And again, if you're looking for something and we don't have it, you can do the contact us on the website, and you can send in a note. If we don't have it, we will create it or find something and share it in our resource library. Here's my contact information. You are always welcome to email me if there are any specific questions, to see if I am able to assist. So with that, I think I did pretty good on time, and then we have time for questions. Laura.
Thank you so much, Katie. That was a wealth of knowledge that you shared. We really appreciate it. We are going to take questions for about 15 minutes. We understand some of you may need to drop off. So as a reminder, we have been recording this webinar, and we will send the link to the recording as well as a link to these slides with all of those wonderful resources by email to all of you who registered for the webinar. It will also be posted in our online resource library. So I'm going to go ahead and dive into some of our questions. The first one is, do you know of any good educational videos which actually show people having intercourse so that it is easy to see exactly which bits go where? Or alternatively, do you know where I could obtain life-size dolls which I would be able to use to show the mechanics of sexual intercourse?
That's a really great question. And I was once asked if there was any good porn videos that I knew of, so that their loved one who was interested in watching porn could see what sex kind of really looked like, instead of what it tends to look like in some pornography. So I reached out to Terry Cowenhoven, and we haven't found one yet. But there is, so also through Stanfield Publishing. Unfortunately, this isn't just a video a family could get. This would have to be something an organization would buy, because it's like an $1,000 curriculum. But there's a curriculum through Stanfield that I am blanking on the name of right this second, but perhaps Laura can start Googling Stanfield, and it's all about, it talks about body parts, and it talks about all of these topics that we were talking about today, but there are videos, and I do believe it shows intercourse in those videos. The other thing is, I don't know about life-size dolls, but I have dolls that I'm sure Laura does not want to grab, that are in our office. They're called Teach-A-Body dolls. And so they're doll size, but they are anatomically correct. And so you would be able to show the penis entering the vagina if you wanted. There's also in the female a baby and a placenta. So you could talk about giving birth. So those are Teach-A-Body. I think Laura is going to try to grab them right now just to show you what they look like just by the face. We don't have to show you all the anatomical body parts. But those are what I know, unfortunately, right now, as far as videos. So hopefully that's helpful.
Thanks,
So
Katie. Yeah, here's the female doll. Um,
yeah, they kind of have creepy faces, but they are anatomically correct. So, something to think about. Thanks so much, Laura.
and then the Stanfield curriculum, you were talking about, is it called the Life Facts series?
Life Horizons, maybe now that you're saying it. They may have changed it,
Yes.
but yeah. Thank you. Yes. So Life Horizons curriculum from Stanfield.
Great. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Laura.
Do you have any very clear resources to show how someone can get pregnant? The only resources that I've seen are diagrams of women's anatomy that shows where a sperm meets an egg. But although lots of different people over the years have used these diagrams to explain this concept to my daughter, she's still very confused about how it all works.
That's a wonderful question. Again, I don't know any, although with those videos, I haven't looked at all of them. So the videos through a maze or through the National Council on Independent Living, they might have those. And then I also wonder, because I didn't look at all the resources on the, what was it, Puberty Planet through the Australia, that website through Australia, they might have some really good resources on that as well.
Great, thank you. Will you be offering any classes for couples to participate in?
We have offered dating and relationship classes in the past. We are getting ready to plan our groups for 2023. So it is very possible that we will be offering that. We've offered things like Dating 101 for individuals who aren't quite in relationships that might be looking to. We've offered Dating 201 for individuals who are in relationships and talking about some ways to facilitate a healthier relationship for people that are already in one and what future plans might look like. So it's very possible that we will be offering some in 2023, but we just haven't gotten there yet.
Thank you. And speaking of dating, specifically for adults with Down syndrome, how much assistance should parents be providing when they start expressing interest in dating? And what kind of guidance and facilitation should we offer?
Yeah, I think it really varies from family to family. Many families end up providing a lot of support, especially at the beginning. Maybe it's even trying to help them identify someone to date and even doing that first initiation of like introducing them, right? And then we know with planning dates, it can require a lot of support. Maintaining the relationship. So I have found that many individuals with Down syndrome are perfectly happy in their relationship, but if the parents don't get along or if the parents have different values and beliefs, oftentimes the relationship ends without the consent of the people with Down syndrome. But so I feel that parents tend to have to provide more support than you would think, unfortunately, to help these relationships be successful. Part of the parent training, the home-based program, in the third session, we actually have a couple with Down syndrome and their parents come and talk about what it's like to be in a relationship. So you get to hear both from the individual's perspective, but also then the parents talking about how much support they provide. So we have some individuals that we know that say they have a boyfriend or girlfriend, but they never see them. Right? They have never really gone on a date with them. And maybe they talk on the phone or FaceTime or text. And then we have others who are, seeing them multiple times a week, or going on family vacations with each other, and then, like I said, I have individuals that I've worked with who are married and living on their own, with less support from family members because they're not even living in a home with parents. So I think it really varies on the individual and the needs and what assistance they want. I mean, if they're just happy with saying they have a boyfriend and they don't care if they ever see them, that's okay, right? I mean, I think that's where these conversations have to happen, and you have to find out what they want and ask them what support they want you to provide in order to make it happen, because they might have an idea about it.
Thank you. And just to clarify, the dolls, are those called Teach a Body dolls?
Yes. And I feel like it's like teach and then a dash body.
Okay. Thank you. We can include a link in the materials we share as well.
Wonderful. Thanks, Laura.
Thank you. So this question is about pregnancy and children. My daughter would like to have children and she'd be a very lovely mother, but she would not be able to look after a child on her own and would need someone else to provide most of the care. I'm in my early 60s and do not want to bring up another baby with or without Down syndrome at my age. Do you have any suggestions as to how to help my daughter understand how difficult it is to be a parent?
Yeah, so I think that's again where it comes to that responsibility of parenting and talking about all the things that are required for a parent. And even going back to like, is there a pet in the house? Well, who feeds the dog? Who takes the dog for a walk? Who takes the dog to the vet when they're, they need to go to the appointments? How do they get there? Thinking, having them even take care of a plant or, something to show them all the things that it takes. And that's going to be using more of those motor strategies, right? Actually having them practice some of these things to fully understand how much is your daughter doing for herself? Is she living independently and taking care of all these things that she's doing for herself? Because if not, you can say, you still need help with this, this, and this. How do you plan on, raising a baby if this happens? Thinking about perhaps career options for her instead. Could she work in a daycare? Could she work in a school? Could she just be around other children so that she doesn't feel that need to be the parent of her own child, but she can still be around children and have that opportunity? Would be some ideas.
Thank you. And I believe you mentioned earlier that you have a visual on female masturbation, correct?
Yes, I just don't know that we put it up on our resource library yet.
Okay, great. There was a question about how to provide that information for girls, specifically the mechanics of it.
Yeah, so we can work on that. I think it's just one that hadn't been updated yet. So we'll update that and we can upload it to our resource library.
Great, thank you. There's also,
and even with female masturbation, sometimes it's just like the rubbing on the outside that they, that they tend to do. I mean, there's obviously finger insertion that they can do, but some of them are just as happy without inserting their fingers. So we'll make sure that the visual supports all of that when we update it.
Thank you. We received a question about an email list to sign up or to get notified about the 2023 relationship classes. We have an email list that is on our resource library, and I can include the link, but if you go to our resource library and scroll down to the bottom, it says join our mailing list, and that is where we share information about our upcoming social skills groups and relationship groups. And then this will likely be our last question. My son is only interested in dating people who do not have Down syndrome or an intellectual disability. How do I handle this?
Yeah, that can be tricky, and we hear that a lot. It's not that it can't happen. I actually know of a couple in Cincinnati where the female has Down syndrome and the male does not have an intellectual disability that we are aware of. I just think oftentimes it's the individuals without a disability that even if they're friendly with someone with Down syndrome, they're not interested in anything more. And so that's where crushes, talking about crushes a lot, and that's okay. We actually have a couple where, I don't know, we were in a dating and relationships group, and an individual brought this up that she didn't want to date someone with Down syndrome or a disability. And another person with Down syndrome who is dating someone with Down syndrome now chimed in and said, you know what, I thought that too, but then I don't see people for, whether or not they have Down syndrome or not. I just see them as a good person. And I met a good person who happened to have Down syndrome that I wanted to date. And so it could just be finding the right person with Down syndrome or some other disability. And they're not going to see that disability. They're just going to see them as a good person that they have a lot in common with. So I think encouraging, you know, the qualities that we look for in someone we date, and Down syndrome doesn't have to be one of those qualities, but we want a good person. We want someone who's nice to us. We want someone who treats us well, like all of these qualities. And we have, I believe, a resource in the resource library on qualities to look for in a romantic partner or even in a friend, and kind of encouraging that aspect. And maybe then they'll find someone who is more appropriate, because we also talk about that someone should basically have similar abilities as us. And obviously we know that individuals with Down syndrome don't all think that you know, they have any kind of disability, right? They think they can do anything and everything. But it is important for all of us, you know, to be with someone who is more similar than different from us. So encouraging that.
Thank you so much, Katie. This has been a great webinar. We really appreciate you offering your time for this. And thank you all for joining us today. When you leave the webinar today, a window will pop up with a feedback survey, and we would really appreciate if you would take a few minutes to fill that out so that we can make sure that we're providing webinars that are on topics that you are all interested in. So thank you again for your time, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.